America. My name is Emile. Osei-Frimpong. I come to you when I come to you. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Rousseau's Emile and Trump's America. And Rousseau is a French philosopher who wrote Emile in 1762, I believe it was released. And the argument is that there's no greater degradation that man faces than being dependent on other people's feelings, on other people's opinions. That means we don't have a life of our own. Our actions are not our own. Our actions are always some sort of manipulation or some sort of cloying to other people, an account of other people's feelings. And that dynamic was characteristic in civil society. So civil society is the market-based institutions, no way of life by which we earn our living through interactions with others. And our way of life is we're allowed ecstasies and luxuries that aren't afforded to us by nature and by our limited talents and abilities. But instead, because of the market system, I can have access to, for example, a microphone that I could not make myself, but instead had to go on Amazon and then, get from some warehouse in China. So there is a way of life that civil society has made for quote unquote free people that actually enslaves them to the opinions of others because they cannot do anything without other people liking them. Whereas before, in his story of nature, man was self-sufficient insofar as he could actually, his power and his needs were twined. Now he dealt with children by saying that naturally parents cared for their children. And so that before parents, both mothers and fathers, got corrupted by civil society, they actually naturally cared for their children appropriately. So the self-sufficiency of the children wasn't really degraded because as a function of nature and with the regularity of nature, parents cared for their children. So they never had to actually suck up to their parents in that way, right? So there are a few points he makes to this, and I think it's actually important to understand the degradation that comes with being dependent on other people, because unless you understand that degradation, then you don't really understand a lot of the anxiety of civil society and the inability of current politics to actually secure freedom, right? So he gets around this by saying that you need a general will that is so overwhelming that it acts with the regularity of nature. It acts with the regularity of nature, so you're not really dependent on other people. Other people service you with the in this society or in this culture, in this state, with the regularity of nature, so you could still be self-sufficient within this fixed system. The problem is when the system starts bending and some people are cloying and they get special favors and there is no real general will. There's just people sucking up to other people and the whole world becomes, I don't know, the Sun King's court, or just a dynamic where you live for sucking up to people. The whole world is like a job interview. I do not like job interviews. I suspect I'm not the only one because there's a lot of sucking up involved. I'd rather just come directly to the people. And I do not suck up to you. I tell you all the things you need to hear, but other people are afraid to say. And I think for that, and for that alone, you should go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, or $50 a month. I do not suck up to sponsors. I will never be sponsored by DraftKings or Prize Picks, Underdog. I will not try to be a procurer where I pimp you out to the corporate sponsors. I don't sell corporate sponsors to you. What those sponsors tell you is that I'm selling, that what they want you to do is sell them your people, right? So I am not a procurer or a pimp. So I will never get the corporate sponsors that will, keep me in. Dependent on their favor. Instead, I come to you directly and independently. You don't have to sponsor me, but I think you should. I can give a higher quality of show and go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, or $50 a month. So Rousseau's problem is that as soon as man becomes dependent on civil society, they live in the opinion of others. They no longer have the power to meet their own needs in nature. Now you need licenses to do things. And now the things you want aren't just natural things. You want all these other things because you've been marketed iPhones and such. And now that's not within your power, so you end up becoming a big old prostitute, and you'll do whatever it is to mercenary yourself. And not only will you mercenary your activities to the opinions of others who've suborned you with their shiny goods, you'll actually ignore your natural responsibilities to your children. And instead, you'll give your children, this is, he makes this argument in Emile, to like some mercenary nurse or charlatan teacher who will not care so much about the growth and independence of your children as much as they will care about separating you for your money. Just like a lot of teachers, some public schools, some private schools, they don't really care so much about the growth of your child as much as making sure that your child moves through and the checks keep coming, whether they read in class or whether they colored, right? So his fears are weird. His fears are real, that the civil society creates a quality of dependence that becomes impossible to fulfill without living in the opinion of others and conforming your behaviors to the opinion of others. The whole world becomes a dynamic of a job interview where you cannot be honest with anybody. And I don't like that. One of the reasons I study philosophy and I do this podcast is a way for me to earn my nut in civil society without actually living in the opinion of others. There is such a thing as audience capture, but I think I'm sufficiently independent that I don't have to really worry about audience capture. I talk about what I think is what you need to hear, the kinds of things that'll help you not squander your life or screw up your kids. Might get in the way of you getting like a better job, but you might get that better job and then screw up your kids. So I'm getting in the way of you getting your impending divorce. I'm what's saving you. I alone am what's saving you from that divorce that you can't afford. You think you can afford it, but you can't afford it. Or the screwed up kid that you think you can afford, but you can't afford it. And so on that power, the power of my mind, you will keep your family in good stead and your life harmonized such that the mutually reinforcing institutions of church and family and all of those and your job and all of that stuff and your politics will support you in your freedom, right? So Rousseau's big target is the dependence that civil society kind of implicates modern life with. And the way to get around that eventually and still keep civil society is you need a culture or a general will that acts with law-like regularity. But there are a few things that he hates, and Emile is hilarious. It's a real shame that it's not read as much and that it took me, 40 some odd years to read it because it just was never assigned. People read, Discourse on Inequality and some other things, but Emile is actually got all the hits, man. So he thinks a lot of nurses are mercenaries. Nurses, as in not nurses and nurses in the hospital, nurses and baby caretakers. They're just mercenaries, and that you have to watch out because from the beginning, children learn to do two things with words. Either they learn to manipulate you and run their adults, or they learn to talk about solving problems. Either they're trying to manipulate you into solving their problems, or it's just a mere communication device to solve problems. So insofar as we rear children, you have to be sure, and I think in modern America, you have to be especially sure with girls, that you don't rear them to live their entire life towards getting other people to do work for them. You don't want the language and every thought to be some sort of form of manipulation to get other people to do things for them because of some sort of sympathy. So he's a big fan of kids need to pretty much live a rather external world where they deal with the world that comes to them and they don't, and they can kind of not kill what they eat because they can't kill yet, but they don't have to suck up to anybody to get what they need. And yet they do have to exercise their both body and mind in a very kind of external way, kind of like a Montessori school where they're just solving puzzles all the time in order to be properly courageous and virtuous and not be always scared of other people's favor, Because when you can actually do things, you don't have to worry about other people's favor. You're actually free when you can do things on your own, right? And so that's one of the theses. And he also hates medicine because he thinks that, except for hygiene is very important to him. And he's like a huge hygiene fan, but medicine is in doctors, and not just because he's in 1762, but in general because he just doesn't believe that doctors are anything but quacks. And who will tell you what you want to hear and give you all the pills you want and just give you all the diagnoses you want without actually, and getting you to live for your diagnoses as opposed to live for doing life. He thinks that all of these medical practitioners, the lying art, as he calls them, are all just quacks. He would have definitely been an anti-vaxxer and would have been upset at closing the world because of a bug, because he thinks that's like this kind of slavishness to health actually like just undermines any sort of courage in the world, and you can't be free if you can't be courageous. So he's not a fan of doctors. He thinks people should live healthily, live hygienically, and then die when they're appointed to die, and miss the whole thing with the doctors, because the doctors will just give you distractions and worries in ways that are completely untoward. So that is a little bit of Rousseau. Now, what does that have to do with Trump's America? Well, in Trump's America, I've said before that you kill what you eat. You eat what you kill, that is. You eat what you kill in a way that it shrinks your world, but you're less dependent on dubious things. You're nakedly against the world in a way that shrinks your world, but makes you more self-sufficient in the shrunken world. Whereas, honestly, in democratic governments, this isn't good left governments, it's democratic governments. They got these public-private partnerships where you get the insecurity of the private market, but the bureaucracy of the public market. And so you still live in opinion of others, but it's insecure. Like, it's insecure. Like people say, like, well, what about the court system? Or what about the rule of law? Well, the rule of law only exists if you have lawyers. Now, in a well-ordered world, everyone would have secure access to lawyers. But now we live in the opinion of the lawyers we hope to seek. We hope they take our case on contingency. We hope that they're going to risk their nut in defending us, even though they might not get paid on it. Well, like, we live a life in democratic governance of depending on not our rights as secured as if they were laws of nature, but on the opinions of others, the fickle opinions of others. You need to go and con a lawyer into taking your case and convince him that the contingency is worth it. As opposed to, in a well-ordered world, we'd have a lawyer by right. We'd have a lawyer by right. If you live in a nation of laws, but you need access to lawyers, secure access to a lawyer. If not, you're just dependent on a legal system that's already alienated from you. But we don't talk about it like that. So what I think Trump's America does is he kind of pulls back the curtain on a sham. And so we get like, it's a lot of no Vaseline intercourse or penetrative intercourse going on in Trump's America. Whereas I guess the Democrats will take the time to spit on that thing. I don't know, but the idea is that there's a quality of dependence in even our healthcare debate. For example, Obamacare, right? Obamacare, you're still depending on the opinion of some fickle like health insurance lobby. You don't know if you have healthcare, right? So that's a Democratic response to a problem that's not a real response. A real response would be security, as if it were a law of nature. As if. And the society would say that. We will secure your health as if it were an immutable law of nature, and you will have access to the health care you need in a transparent process. If the Democrats ran on that, they would not, it wouldn't be so easy to undermine their health care. It wouldn't be so easy to undermine American health care. Right now, it is so easy because we have Obamacare where, I'm not even sure if you have care. Do you have? Maybe you have care. Maybe you don't. You have, it's very expensive. And do you have the care you need? It's John Q all over again. So there is the argument that any sort of dependence on the opinion of others is a form of slavery. And that's different than rights. You get rights because they're secured by a stable government. And, it'd be nice if they're also secured by culture. And that you can make a claim against. It's not petitioning for favor. It's standing up for your right. That's a very important distinction, because the only way to get around the degradation of civil society while sustaining some of the goods and services only civil society can secure. I don't want to grow my own tomatoes. I want to go to Kroger, stuff like that. Is to have a civil society that guarantee that you have access to goods and services and the ability to earn access to goods and services by right. It's the fickleness that causes problems. I'll say this again. It's the fickleness that causes problems, and living your life in accordance to other people's fickleness. And that degrades a slave, and it degrades a master also, because you can't have real relationships with other people. Right? So Rousseau tries to get rid of all of this by just understanding that we should not be educated by people who are manipulating us or we're trying to manipulate. Instead, we should be educated by things or people who behave like things. There's going to be a problem later on in life because you don't really have real relationships because you don't really think about other people as people. You think about other people as things. But as it stands, the problem is real, that a life that's in the opinion of others. So hold on, I'm gonna philosophical thirst trap. Is that Phil? I don't know who you are. I'm gonna answer your question in a second. Let me just finish it. So the idea that you can live in opinion of others and still be free is degrading, and we teach that degradation when we teach children to use their language to get adults to do things for them. Instead, we should be teaching children how to do for themselves. And unfortunately, that means their life is going to be limited to what they can do for themselves, or what we can organize to give the illusion that they're doing for themselves, give them the habit of doing for themselves. All right, so Philosophical Thirst gave $5 in Super Chat to say, it's slavery and possibly a war crime when my girlfriend asked me to drive her mom from the airport at 3 a.m. Yeah, well, by what right? Does she have that claim on you? You didn't marry into that, but apparently you're like, is the sex that good? It's a question. I don't know. That's what and how casual do they feel about asking you to do that? Is a question. Like there's a quality of degradation that you feel at the whim of your girlfriend's mother's travel plans. And your girlfriend's not going to act to protect your activity and make sure that your activity, including that activity of sleep, is your own. Instead, you sleep at the pleasure of your girlfriend's mom. And are you free in that world? I don't know. I don't know. Rousseau would say no. In a well-ordered world, she'd get an Uber. In a well-ordered world, you would not have to be dependent. Your activity would not be dependent on the opinions of others. All right. So that is the overall argument in Rousseau's Emile. And like I said, you could either be educated by people, which is dubious because that turns into a quality of mutual manipulation that can't actually be really well done. You could be educated by things, which Rousseau likes, because then you get to solve problems without manipulation, but with a quality of self-sufficiency in a regular world that abides by your will as a piece of your body. Or you could be educated by nature, which you can't really change. So there are other problems. There are other problems. So yeah. So he's a big fan of being educated by things, lots of problems and those kinds of, and it's funny, he has a great line about how peasant boys and peasant children speak so much better than children speaking, because children are always trying to manipulate and they mumble and they don't actually have to be able to make themselves heard because with clear instructions. Whereas peasant boys, he hears outside of his windows in the country, are yelling at each other and playing games across an expanse, so they have to articulate clearly. He said, like, well, the quality of their verbiage, the expanse of their vocabulary is smaller, but the clarity of their speech is more. And I say to that, that my speech has gotten better since I started this podcast or this YouTube show. It has helped me enunciate better. And maybe we should get podcasts for the people. Maybe that should be a thing in our public schools to help our kids enunciate, because left to their own devices and like scrolling on TikTok, they'll mumble rap their way to a world. Mumble rap is a word, is a genre of speaking, because we've in a way lost the ability to speak clearly. And anything that helps us speak clearly is probably a good thing for our democracy. So maybe podcasting should be in the public schools as a way. Maybe that would be a fine assignment. Go ahead in the chat. You can pillory the idea, or you could decide that that's a garbage, trash idea. But the idea that people should be able to speak clearly and loudly in a way that conveys ideas, I think is very important. And we can't take it for granted. And we can't just assume that children playing across the hills in the countryside will do it. Will be a proper prophylactic against modern society, modern civil society. Instead, we need to be, worried about all the devices and all that stuff, undermining our kids' ability to think. I'm going to do a show on AI because I really do think there might be 3 classes of people in 20 years. They're going to be the class of critical thinkers who watch and give to this podcast. They're going to be the class of people who fake critical thinking through AI, and they faked all their college and schoolwork through AI. And then there's going to be, the class of rubes who do not think at all. And I think those 3 classes will I don't know where the critical, I don't know how big the critical thinking class will be. I know that they're not the ones giving their kids phones. Do not give your kids phones. If you think that's a good idea, you need to watch more of my videos and rethink your quality of parenting. I should do a show. I'm going to do a show. I'm going to cut this one. We're going to do another show probably tomorrow on Gavin Newsom having Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon on. And, he said something about Charlie Kirk that was really kind of telling, insofar as he said that, well, my 13-year-old son loves you, Charlie. And he was just in awe of that. And I'm just thinking, what's your 13-year-old son doing loving Charlie Kirk? That's ridiculous. You are a bad parent. Why is your 13-year-old son listening, knowing who Charlie Kirk is? Your 13-year-old son should know a lot of things. My 12-year-old daughter has no idea who Charlie Kirk is. She has no idea who Colin, her daddy, is. That's not, if you're a real parent, your kids are too busy for them to be in that nonsense. So I'm going to do a show on Gavin Newsom's dubious political calling, but the Democrats are such a muddled morass of incoherence and conceptual depravity that I wouldn't be surprised if, Newsom just lurches right because, their people actually believe in things. All right. Thank you for your time. I'm going to go now and come back in a different time. But think about the way in which Trump's America rips the curtain off of all of the dependencies, the dubious dependencies that American life depends on. If they were more secure, if they were not legislatively secure, just secure services and goods, it would be harder to undermine them. But the dubious dependencies, insofar as they're supposed to be secure as a matter of governance, but instead you're still kind of sucking up to people. You're still kind of hoping and praying for healthcare. In any world where, people give you the dependence of others and call that freedom, and you're supposed to be grateful for it, is going to be a world where there's going to be a revolution against that quality of dependence, because that quality of dependence isn't independence. We can have an independent big government, but it's got to secure things by right. You can't have questions about whether you have dental care or whether you can afford eyeglasses. Like all of those things have to be secure. If those things are secured by right, then you can have freedom. But if they're not, if they're still dependent on like you fulfilling a form and like maybe someone's discretion in a weird way or some AI bot, then you can't be free. You live in the opinion of others and your life will be meaningless. And insofar as it's meaningful and not in a way that's authored by you. All right. Thank you for your time, and I will talk to you at another time. Peace. Go to funkyacademic.com, kick in $5, $15, or $50.